Welcome to the ROI Masterclass, the podcast where vision meets strategy and bold moves create measurable results. I'm Liat Siegel, interior designer and ROI strategist with 17 years of experience. I help businesses transform properties and ideas into high-performing assets. This show is specifically for real estate investors, hospitality operators, and boutique developers who aren't afraid to take risks, challenge the status quo, and demand a return on every decision they make. Each and every week, we talk with innovators and leaders across industries about the strategies and the insights and really all the unconventional thinking that turns potential into profit every single time. If you believe that smart design, decisive leadership, and strategic risk are the keys to real ROI, you're in the exact right place. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Thomas Hagos, managing partner at Hackey Partners, a vertically integrated real estate development and investment firm advancing complex, institutionally aligned projects totaling $1 billion plus in development value across the Southeast, New York, and Washington. Thomas focuses on mixed-use, multifamily, and community-centered development, with an emphasis on disciplined execution, strategic partnerships, and sophisticated capital structuring. Known for his research-driven approach and ability to navigate complexity, he's an emerging voice in institutional real estate development. Thank you so much for joining us today, Thomas. This has been months in the making. From the first time my husband and I met with you at a Starbucks in New York City, you told us your story and your background, and it was unbelievable to hear how you've gone through so much in your life and where you are today. Can you share with us a little bit about that story at a high level and how that's impacted how you approach real estate today?
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure doing this podcast with you. I had the pleasure to meeting you and your husband a few months ago. We had a great meeting. The way your dedication to building relationships without expecting nothing. I think that's the core of business, being a service to people without, having a deal or a contract. A lot of people choose for a deal for a contract, and that's where and when they fall short. And thank you for that, Liad. I just want to give you your flowers. To talk a little bit about my background. I'm originally from Ethiopia, born and raised in a small town called Humera, which borders two other countries, Eritrea and Sudan, and come from a construction family. My father, he is a construction manager working across East Africa. He's based in South Sudan, worked in projects, road construction, and smaller construction management related projects. But he also does supply works with the UN, all these other agencies that are existing in that region. So I come from that background. My introduction to development in the built environment is really from a family. But then when I did my undergrad in urban and regional planning, never really thought I would be in that space. I think it was more of I wanted to do something that's artistic. And my parents, they didn't like the idea of going to music school at that time. That's what I wanted to do. And I auditioned, I got into a music school. However, I changed my mind a few months in, and I ended up going to an engineering school studying urban and regional planning. And that really gave me the foundation of what the world of development is, what the world of built environment is from the international perspective. And a few years later, found myself at Columbia. I did a Master's of Real Estate Development program, which gave me really the capital structure and understanding institutional development, which is separate from what I grew up learning. This is a little bit about how I came to this industry.
What was that change that made you switch from music to, was it urban planning?
My parents talked me out. I was, a teenager, wasn't really sure if I wanted to do that music school also. Wasn't very sure about it. It was just a passion. But then urban planning is still art. The school that I went to is called Hagos University, and it's under the architecture school. Initially, I wanted to do architecture, but the focus on one building, it wasn't just, what I came from. I come from a very regionally interesting and complex town. And I think the idea of studying regional planning really compelled me. And that's how I really got into it.
What specifically drew you? What was the complexity that you apply now to development?
At some point in life, there was an event that happened in West Africa, which was internal conflicts. That was my city, was one of the most vulnerable cities. A lot of people have lost their life, lost their wealth and everything. I was part of that community that sought refuge in a different country, which is Sudan. So while during my time in Sudan, I had the chance to work with some New Yorkers who really ignited my interest into coming to New York, I had the pleasure in working with New York Times as an interpreter and also Human Rights Watch as a research assistant. And both of those people I worked with at that time happened to be from New York, and they went to Columbia. And the journalist from New York Times, we built a good relationship. We were spending a lot of time. He stayed, I think, for a few days or a week. And one thing, I'm always curious to ask questions, and I don't believe there is, dumb question or anything like that. I think that's what I always, stuff by just asking questions. There's no wrong question. So I ask a lot of questions. And one of the questions that I asked those guys was what's really being done from, international community. I think being in Africa and looking at a lot of conflicts like this, we tend to scream out, to the international community, hey, but really there's not a lot of attention, especially to our region, the sub-Saharan African countries. I don't want to make this political, but I think life is politics. And I was challenging those people and myself, why is this happening? Why is this region just on constant conflicts, on constant disruptions and all of that? And I couldn't find a really clear answer. But, we all have our assumptions. We all have our own narratives. And none of the narratives that were spoken to me at that time really didn't make sense. I think, I thought there was a systemic problem. But then one of the questions that I asked was, it's really not fair for people to sleep on the dirt. A lot of people were sleeping on the dirt. People who had houses, people who had lives, people who were doctors, engineers, investors, farmers, all of that. And it was a big question to me. And I'm not sure if you remember, but the journalist said something that really ignited my interest to thinking about going abroad and going to grad school and things like that. What I asked him was, how is this fair? It was a very irrational question, but he didn't have the answer. But his answer was, well, Thomas, you're an urban planner. Maybe you can do something about it. Maybe you can develop something. And I took that word very literally. At that particular time, I was reading a book. I had it on my phone as a PDF, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. We are literally what we think about. You believe you're amazing, you're amazing. You believe you're not amazing, you're not amazing. And I believe I could be a solution, and I believed there's something that I could do for that. And one of the possibilities that I thought at that time was going abroad and going to graduate school. Right before the conflict and everything started, I was also doing entrepreneurial stuff like this import and export business, and it was going really good, and I was successful in that business at that time. But the conflict and everything disrupted everything. So I still had that entrepreneurial spirit, and I believe, I could come to the world. The US wasn't the first place that I wasn't thinking about, but New Yorkers convinced me to come to New York. And I think with my background in music, I grew up listening a lot of Jay-Z, and subconsciously I learned a lot about New York without even thinking about it. Zoning was invented in New York, and as urban planners, we studied that a lot, and that was one of my favorite classes back in planning school as well. So we referenced New York a lot.
Amazing. I mean, it sounds like you were faced with huge difficulties, huge challenges. And when it was mirrored back to you, well, maybe you could do something about it. You took up that challenge. You took on that flag and you said, I'm going to do something. So what is it now in the development world that you're doing here within the US, or maybe plans eventually for the future that you might have that were affected by that moment in time?
Let's start with defining the name of my company, right? Haki means truth in Tigrinya, which is my first language. And I believe every human being in the world deserves to live a fulfilling life, truthful life. And everybody deserves to get access to education, to get access to healthcare. Everybody really. Sounding more like a socialist here, but I think that's how the world needs to be structured. But unfortunately, there's been some, events in history that changed the whole pattern of the world and how we think and how we operate and things like that. So what I thrive or what I look to do with Haki and in the development world is to build thriving communities, a community where they have everything they need to thrive, to become better human beings, to serve the world, serve themselves, their country, their family, everyone really. So the projects that we approach at Haki, we call them research-oriented developments. What that really means is, we start with studying the area that we want to develop, the history of it, and what's really going on, not just from the market analysis perspective. How do we make money out of this community? I think building thriving community is indirectly building wealth. If we're building builders, community that thrives, that builds, I think in other words, we're contributing to the well-being of the world and to the economic development agendas of, city, counties, states, countries have.
Absolutely. I think that really matches well with my thesis on ROI, that it's not just the financial impact, but it's also the impact that our actions have have on the people that are using the spaces. And I think that what you're developing shows real promise on making a difference in people's lives. And we spoke about this before in our previous conversations, but can you share with our audience about your project? You're working on something specific that will be replicable throughout the country and maybe even the world at some point.
Thanks for asking that question, Liad. So one of the projects that we've been working on at Hacky, we call them library homes. Library as in library, but with the I at the end, I for innovation. So what library homes is really at the core, a housing project that celebrates lifelong learning and wellness. Those words sound very generic and vague, but we have been thinking about, the programmings and what those words would really mean in action very thoroughly. We believe the key for sustainable development is integration, not only with the banks, for capital needs, the county for, zoning and entitlement and all of that. But, we believe at Hacky, building relationships with research institutions and universities is also very key. There's been, universities were first created, I'm going to say it again, for the betterment of humanity, to make humanity better, to make life better. And there's been a lot of studies on those topics specifically. Business schools do that, medical schools, sociology schools, economics schools. So our approach is really working closely and learning from those research institutions and learning from those research outcomes to systematically refine our programmings. So with library homes, for example, we're looking at community facilities as a systemic course for building thriving communities, which is our motto at Hacky. What this means is, we work with universities to integrate their healthcare systems where our communities, most of the projects that we're looking at it with Hacky right now are workforce development. But what I mean is, people like our teachers, our bus drivers, people who make the continuity of life going every day, they're being pushed out of the city more and more. We see that in every part of the country and even the world. We know there's stigma with teachers and those daily worker communities. They don't have those basic necessities, that can help them thrive in life, but also, something that they can afford. With now being everything, inflation and everything, going up, salaries not going that up, those people are being pushed away from the cities more. So our goal is really to focusing on those communities and building all the necessary amenities that they would need. This is healthcare, for example. Healthcare is very expensive, as we all know. What we're trying to do with library homes is building systems. I can't talk about it much for IP purposes right now, but we're building technology systems that integrate with hospitals to help pre-diagnose our community before they even spend a dime. So we're building those kind of integrations and also working with technical college to implement their trade schools at those community facilities, what we're calling the library hub. It's a community facility where we're housing all of this, childcare center, all of the things that are necessary for humanity. So library homes is really, it houses all of these components at one as a launchpad for lifelong learning and wellness.
So in the theme of truth, it sounds like you're really looking to support the middle class with all the tools that they would need in order to thrive, not just survive anymore, right? It's getting so difficult, so challenging for the middle class to really thrive with the cost of housing and just life in general. I think that what you're doing is really admirable. It's creating an entire infrastructure, essentially, so that there's no excuse except to thrive, especially with learning, because we know that when investing in skills, that is the biggest ROI.
Absolutely. And just to add to your point, I think the biggest ROI is seeing people not only learning stuff, but also have the hope and the dignity that they deserve. Truthfully speaking, I think everybody should deserve that. And that's what we thrive to bring in. Coming from a very challenging background myself, I wouldn't say very challenging, but I had a very challenging moment in my life where I thought I was not going to see the next day. So I think what I personally advocate for these projects to be is also bringing hope and, giving dignity to the people that deserve it the most.
Absolutely. Quality of life is everything. And so many of the investors that I've spoken to say how important it is that they create environments for their tenants or for the people that are using their space, renters, that they should feel good. They should be proud of where they live, where they work, where they play. And that is part of being human, right? Is that access, is the ability to access a dignified environment that you feel that rather than things are working against you and constantly pulling you back, that this can propel them forward. And and think about all of the ripple effect that this could have. You save one person's life and they become a doctor, and then they save how many? So that's just like a drop in the bucket of Hacky, and how I see it becoming such an integral ethos to how development projects should go forward from here.
To make those kind of ambitious, it's not even, like sometimes when we pitch those projects, we hear feedbacks, oh, it's very ambitious, but no, it's not very ambitious. Looking for a better life and, striving to make life better. That's how we should all think in our realm of our business. You, as a designer, you're always thinking about how can my design make life easier for people? And that's, what everyone should do. And I think if we approach everything from the human-centric approach, all the other ROIs that personally, like the ROIs that we're talking about, the return or our investment is having a positive attitude and wanting to make people's life better. And our return is enormous. And when we approach things like that, it's God created the world full as a full. So there's nothing that we really don't have in the world. That's how I interpret my work in real estate development.
Yeah. And I think it's only ambitious when you're going at it alone and you don't have other people in your corner who have that same motivation, drive, and vision. But when you're surrounded by partners, we were talking about that right before the show, that when you're surrounded by partners who believe in the same vision, in the same impact that you do, and you're moving both in the same direction or all in the same direction, that momentum is so powerful. And I think that it becomes easier, right, to make that impact. And it's just a given at that point. It's not ambitious. It's, we're going to make a difference. We're not in it just for the money. It needs to have an impact on the people's lives that are using that in that space, that environment, that building.
Absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough on roles of partners. I am very fortunate in that sense, having partners not only who believe in the same human-centric approach to what we do, but also are way smarter than me, way more experienced than I am. And, having people who challenge you every day, having people who also bring resources, is really something that I'm very humbled and fortunate enough to have. I cannot emphasize enough the roles of partners, because you cannot really do anything with one hand. You need a second hand to clap. Very old proverb. But yes, I echo that.
Absolutely. So with those relationships and partnerships, what's the way to build those partnerships and relationships? How do you approach that? And I think it's from what you've explained that it's central to everything that you do. So how do you use that in order to continue to grow and learn from others that have more experience or a different set of skills than you do?
I would say having good intentions, but I believe most people have good intentions, and having good intentions and the drive, and not just being afraid. We're going back to the first thing that we were talking about, like not being afraid to ask questions. You're only dumb if you don't ask, right? And I think those relationships, how I was able to cultivate relationships with people who are way more experienced, way more knowledgeable, and way more resourceful than I am, is by having that positive attitude. And, I knew when I started my graduate school, I wanted to become an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I had a business back home where I had a language school with a friend of mine. We co-founded a language school. We called it Galaxy. We had a lot of students, and we also had a lot of talking about partnership. I couldn't do it on my own, but my best friend at that time, who was also way smarter than me, we had that same idea and we pursued it. And we were fortunate enough to get a space, to have support from the city, youth empowerment groups, and all of that. And coming back to real estate, coming back to Columbia, God bless her, Professor Patrice Darrington was the director of the real estate development program when I was there. And during an office hour, I went to her office and asked, Professor, I'm not looking really to go the corporate route. What do you suggest? And she said, well, maybe you can use the Columbia platform to connect Columbia alums who are doing entrepreneurial stuff in the development world. And the first thing that came to mind, it was, the first, second week of classes was to establish a student club. And I named it Real Estate Entrepreneurship Club. I was an entrepreneur, but I was not, full real estate entrepreneur at that point. It was just ambition and wanting, to do things. We recruited students and we invited a couple Columbia alums and also beyond to come and speak to the classes. And having that exposure also inspired me to go after every conferences, real estate related, every every virtual, educational stuff. Project Destin is a very popular one. I suggest any viewer of yours, Liat, especially people who are in the early career, to pursue that. I did a few other programs such as Project Reap, which is also very instrumental training that I did when I was back in Atlanta. As a planner, I also am very aware with what's going on with the urban planning world. APA, American Planners Association, there's a NPC conference that's hosted every year. I was first invited by a friend of mine from graduate school who was doing the urban planning program. We went to Minnesota, and I've never seen so many planners under one roof like that week. So that really opened my eyes to really look at things from the national, international perspective. And I really want to give the flowers to Dr. Anissa Gurta, who I met, and I spoke for 5 to 10 minutes maybe. And she made an introduction with very important people that continue to shape and reshape my life and my career in the development world. And that really, those kind of relationships and sharing, having the positive attitude and asking people and sharing what you want to achieve, really, all of this being done with a positive attitude leads, people can see that, people see that, people see passion. I see that. And when I talk to people, when they're passionate about something that they really like, they want to do, people see that, people notice that, and share it. That's what I say. And share your story, talk about what you want to do, and also be knowledgeable. I think that's the biggest asset, especially as an entrepreneur who has ideas. Ambitions are good, but you also need to be knowledgeable. That's what people buy. That's what sells at the end of the day. People can notice that also, like from a mile away. They can see that. When you can see how well people are informed about a specific thing by the kind of questions they ask. A person who saw your website about how their interiors, who saw everything, can ask a better question than a person who is getting to know you on the train because they're not really informed about what you do. They can start with what's interior design, but someone that was already, read something and is at least knowledgeable, they can ask better questions. And with better questions, you get better answers. With better answers, you get better platform to move forward.
Like, what is ROI driven interior design, right? That's a whole nother question. Yeah, I think it just really builds off of everything that you shared initially about the impact that you're making, and that it's very people centric, because that continues over into networking, building relationships, asking the right questions, and also being of value to others where they can receive and they can grow. And it's really about, I see networking as Gary Vee likes to say, jab, jab, right hook, or that's his book, right? You give, and then you ask for something in return so that you can continue giving, right? And continue doing. So I love that perspective very much. Positivity is everything. And it's really amazing when people like yourself have gone through really challenging situations to still come out of it so positive and optimistic and focusing on the good rather than, focusing on all the negatives. So kudos to you.
Thank you, Leah. Really.
I would love to hear a little bit about when looking at funding a project, raising capital, and structuring deals. What kind of challenges or perhaps key learnings can you share with our audience that would help them maximize return on investment?
I think that's a very good question, because in order for a real estate project to be viable or to be buildable, you would usually need three things, in summary. First is the deal itself, the land. You need the land that you can build. The second thing is the right capital structure and funding, aka the money. You need to buy it and do whatever you need to do to make sure that you can build on that particular site. And the third thing is, and the most important thing, is having subject matter of expertise. And that can be you, that can be, so you either need to come from one of these angles. So deals usually happen, somebody has the land, somebody has the money, and somebody knows how to structure and make it a deal. That's how they happen. And I think as developers, our superpower is really originating a deal, capitalizing a deal, and executing a deal. Capital is very important. You can have the deal, you can have the subject matter of expertise, but if you don't really understand how capital works, none of it really matters. Looking at the positive side is there's a lot of capital sources around the world, around the country, from a state level, county level. You just have, again, this all goes back to being the subject matter of expertise and finding that capital from where it is. In my case, or from the Hagos perspective, all of our projects projects are mission-driven, or we call research-oriented mission-driven projects. We focus on the workforce housing market. We work with CDFIs. CDFIs are community development financial institutions who share the same value, who share the same mission. And usually those CDFIs, they have the capital that you would need to acquire and do your due diligences. And that's really where I focus on, because we don't always have the money to buy that particular piece of land. In some cases, it's very expensive and you need to finance it. And those CDFIs, where they come in is they become the bridge before you get into the construction phase. But it would still need some kind of subject matter expertise to get to that level as well. You need to have the site under control. You need to have very sound and correct way of underwriting. Doesn't need to be some fancy and flashy Excel model, but figuring out sources and uses and what kind of housing product are you're looking to do and all of that. That's what they typically need to see. It's a process, but it happens. That's where I focus on from a Hagos perspective. But there's a lot. Some people do this pre-development funding from friends and family. You would need those initial $100,000 to $200,000 to really get to closing. And in my case, we work with banks and CDFIs that have the same mission.
It sounds to me that you really thrive and do well bringing subject matter experts together. How do you determine who's right for what aspect, and what are the key roles that you typically will need to bring in on a project?
So one of my partners, aka my mentor, her name is Beatrice Siblis. She says, I'm not a creator, I'm a curator. And I think a lot of developers have the same kind of superpower. And I think that's what really makes a developer a developer. In my case, I leverage LinkedIn a lot. Ever since I got introduced to LinkedIn, I've always been a premium member as soon as I understood the value of it. Even when I was very early on my career, LinkedIn is a very important tool that, in my case, for example, I try to learn about people before having meetings with them, before talking to them. I try to learn as much as I can. Nowadays, everybody's out there on the internet. You can find details. And then how do you really find those people is try to learn as much as you can about the community that you're looking to do work at. And the local they are, the better. That local expertise, that local knowledge it's a big differentiator. And yeah, again, going out to community events and, industry related events, those cocktail nights and all of that. I don't do that often anymore. I think I'm a lot more busier right now. Not only that, but I also have created a network that I continue to communicate and do work with remotely. But I think, going out to those events and meeting people, just, you learn about people so much and you'll automatically visualize it. So I had a pleasure of having on my team on projects from folks that teach at, those Ivy League universities, PhDs, and folks from Forbes 30 under 30, just diverse people who have diverse skill sets from all walks of life. And, going back to that positive attitude, when you have that positive attitude and when you're really trying to do good from the heart, which is what I believe I drive to do, you'll know who to bring on. And it's not a rocket science making, you wanted to do something educational. You work with someone that's really an expert on that. Some issues that I face when trying to do this, not everyone is like you, Leah. And what I mean when not everyone is like you is, giving is receiving. I believe giving is receiving. Some people are hesitant to share their time without no contract. So they will need a contract. Well, they will need a retainer. Oh, I need $5,000, to retain me and things like that. And in development, most of the things are uncertain. Let's talk about the project first. Let's talk about from human to human level, right? And I know we're all in it for the money. I mean, we all need to make money. However, just giving your time and giving your genuine feedback about a project, about a thing really sets you apart from a lot of your peers. And in ways that you don't even understand, you will receive it.
Absolutely. I love that. It's really wonderful that you're a curator. And I think that is something that I resonate with a lot, because that's what we're doing with our ROI advisory board. We're bringing in experts from multidisciplinary fields that can help understand and strategize on a broader level ROI perspective, not just design. I think that from my corner of the world, of the real estate world, the approach is that it's just aesthetics rather than strategy. But it sounds like you're also coming from it from a strategic standpoint of how can I leverage the people around me and the strengths and the skill sets that they have, and bringing everybody to the table to create this better project, this impact-driven project.
Absolutely. And you're doing it the right way, Leah. kudos, to you and your family. Hearing more about you and your work and even just your lifestyle it's something that I admire.
Thank you so much. What's next for Hacky? What does the future look like in 5-10 years from now?
So right now, Hacky is advancing pipeline of projects of $1 billion plus in total development cost. And, the next 5 years, Hacky will be focusing on these projects, less on originating new deals, but really focusing on the current pipelines that we have and really continue to be human centric and be an active player from the institutional real estate development side, an active player on research oriented development. I think, to my knowledge, there is not a lot of development companies, that are focusing on research oriented development projects. And we want to be the model, the national model for research oriented development and development projects that are replicable across the country and across the world. That's what the future holds.
Amazing. Amazing. That's very exciting. I think that you're doing what we're doing you're doing it on a macro level and we're doing it on a more micro interior side and you're doing it on a development side. And that resonates with me so much. It's never a good idea to start a project without research, without the data to back it, to understand the impact that it's going to have on the users. And then what would a project be without systems for scale? Because it doesn't make sense to repeat it again and again and again from scratch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The world is moving fast, and I think we're not keeping up with how the world is moving. I think some of our systems are way too outdated. So that's why at Hacky, we like to focus on research oriented. So we want to make sure that, all these decisions that we make are disciplined and up to date and futuristic.
Amazing. Innovation. I love it. I love it. If our audience wants to connect with you, partner with you, learn more, how can they do that?
Hackypartners.com is our website. And my email is thomas.hagos@hackypartners.com. And I'm also very available on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me.
Amazing. Amazing. We'll put your information in the show notes. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your heart and your desire for good in real estate with us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you so much. God bless.